Well, here's a fun thing that we can do. We can spin this gear, and because these guys are also gears, they also spin, like this. So I'm going to quickly show you how to set this up from scratch. So these gears are what you would call a compound game object. Essentially, it's just one big game object made up of littler game objects. So to make this from scratch, we're just going to go ahead and create an empty game object to contain all of our objects. We'll just call this my gear. And then we can see that this is just a squished cylinder. So let's go ahead and make a primitive cylinder using the game object 3D object create cylinder routine. Let's put this as a child. And this is already 0, 0, 0. So that's the center of it, but the rotation is wrong. So let's change the rotation. By the way, you can do a snap rotation if you hold control. So blah, 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 blah. And now that's 90 degrees facing that way. Probably want to move this out a little bit into the scene like this so we can see it better. We can squish it like this. This is probably a little bit too wide, so I'm going to shrink it more down like that. And then I'm going to squish it even more like this. Let's move it closer in so we can see. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to replace this capsule collider with a mesh collider so the collision is more accurate. I'm going to say mesh collider, and then I'm going to make this convex. Okay, the next thing to take care of are the teeth, and I'm going to do a little bit of a trick to just make that really quickly. So I'm going to make a new empty game object inside the my gear, and then I'm just going to call this tooth rig. And then we can create a cube inside this tooth rig, scale it, but the key thing is to offset it to the side. So let's just go ahead and offset it here and then scale it down like this. We want to make it centered first, like that. And then we do the offset. Just going to scale it down like this. And you can probably guess what I'm trying to do with this, but I just want to get this tooth the right size so it doesn't have any weird behavior when it's spinning. Maybe that's about the right size. Okay, cool. So now this is offset like this. So what we can do if we wanted to make the other teeth is we just duplicate this and then rotate it along the cylinder. So it's kind of easy to position that way. So this is going to be 180 degrees. And then what we can do is we can take these two here, duplicate it like this, and then do a snap rotation. And then we have the next set, do another snap rotation. We have the next set, another snap rotation. And then we have the next set. Really quick, right? Okay, now we need to get this shape, which is static at the moment, to be simulated in physics. And the quickest way we can do that, especially to give it the spinning behavior like this, is to just add a hinge joint. So we just go ahead and say add component. Let's look for hinge joint. And this hinge joint essentially turns it into a rigid body. And we can see that there is this little orange arrow over here. And essentially what that means is that it's going to spin along this axis. So like basically like this. So that's a little bit unnatural for us because we've set up our gear so it's facing this way, and we actually want it to spin along the z-axis like this, right? So the way to fix that is if we look at this axis over here, we get rid of the x component completely, and then we just have the z component. So now we can see this orange arrow is pointing this way. Okay, one more thing we need to do is I want to add a physics utility component here, which is part of EZPZ Toolkit, which means we can now do some basic manipulations to this gear. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this button over here. And then let's actually talk to my gear. you just want to clear this out and actually talk to the right object. There is a temptation to just drag the new gear here and just use the same message, but that seems to bug out. So the best bet is to just clear this out so it's empty, add a new one in here, and then talk to the object we want to talk to. Okay, so if you want to spin this along the z-axis, we need to use the physics utility. And then we have a whole bunch of functions in here with the physics utility. The function we want to use is spin axis z. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to add a torque force along this rotation here. And then currently the parameter for that force is 0, so we probably don't want that to be 0. It's not going to do anything if it's 0. So let's put in a different number in there, like 6, and let's have a look. And now it spins. So that was probably spinning a little bit fast, but the way to slow that down is we either reduce the force that we add to the torque or we increase the mass of the object. And if we try to spin this now, we can see that it spins a little bit slower because heavier objects are harder to spin. So essentially that's the law of inertia. And now we can get a series of these to spin together. I'm just going to move this along over here. And then essentially we just duplicate more gears. So I'm going to say duplicate here. And that's not going to work very well because the teeth are touching. So we need to rotate it slightly. And then we can add another one to the chain again, just duplicate again. We just need to get rid of the rotation again, because that's going to get the gears stuck together. Let's move that up a little bit slightly so the tooth isn't touching the main hub. And then these later gears are a little bit heavy, so they're not going to spin as nicely. So let's reduce their weight, both of them, to 1. And then this guy can remain 6 because he's the one that's going to spin the rest of them. Let's have a look at how this works out. Spin. And that's it. That's how we set up a gear system, by building our gears from scratch and then using some tools that's available for us in EZPZ Toolkit. Thanks for watching.